On today's episode of Chords and Coffee, we are going to inject the chromatic scale into some of your blues playing. You know, the chromatic scale is incredibly useful. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you some very basic chord forms. And if you don't know these, this is a perfect spot to jump right in, because I'll show you these chord forms, and then we're going to approach some of the notes that are inside these chords with a little chromaticism. You know, the first time I remember hearing the chromatic scale and somebody said, hey, you should learn this, it sounded like this. Which I thought sounded pretty dumb at the time. And later, I realized that a lot of my favorite players, especially ones who are influenced by jazz or come from the realm of, playing jazz music, not only do they use the chromatic scale all the time, but they use this chromatic approach to move into a note. And in fact, a lot of classical composers use this. I mean, I don't even know where to begin on this, but I will say this. As a kid, one of the first times I took note of this was, you remember in the 90s, Warren Beatty did a Dick Tracy movie, and there was only one color of yellow, there was only one color of green and purple, and he had this kind of real kind of very interesting sort of color palette that sort of invoked the comic strip. And his love interest in the movie was this lady named Tess. And Danny Elfman did a gorgeous job. And I remember hearing this kind of, and it was kind of this very Gershwin sounding, big sweeping melodies. And I realized later, I was like, well, that's just this little chromatic approach into those notes. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some chords. I'm going to show you something really cool with the pentatonic scale, the good old pentatonic scale, and how to use a little chromaticism with that. And if that's all you get from this episode, that, my friend, will probably change your playing forever, in a good way, because it is such a infectious thing to get in your hands, and it's great for country, it's great for jazz, it's great for rock and roll, it's great for adding a little stank on your spank, a little sassafras in your tea, you know what I mean? You're going to enjoy it. And then the other thing I'm going to show you is I'm going to give you like a little blues progression in the key of A, and what this will do is this will give you something either to put on your looper, or if you got a buddy that you're playing with, give these chords to your buddy and then try out some of these chromatic ideas that we're going to talk about. All right, so here we go. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time, we bring you a free guitar lesson with Chords and Coffee. These videos take time and money to create, and it's our free gift to you. All that we ask in return is that you leave comments on the videos and that you subscribe to this channel. When you do that, you make a massive difference in our ability to help to continue to have Chords and Coffee online for free. Thanks for being a part of this community, and thanks for watching. All right, so let's get started here. So the first thing is, let's just use these basic shapes. You know this is kind of like the F shape, but we're gonna slide it up here to the 5th fret. I'm gonna have my index finger on the 5th fret of the high E, holding down the E and the B on the 5th fret, and then I'm gonna have my middle finger on the 6th fret of the G, and then my ring finger is gonna be on the 7th fret of the D. Okay, so hold that, put that on the shelf, and then we're gonna do this shape, but I'm going to show you just a little variation, but this is sort of the parent shape of this. We're going to have an index finger on the 5th fret of the A. I'm not playing the low E at all. I'm going to have my ring finger on the 7th fret of the D, the G, and the B. Good old D bar chord. And then the same thing would be true of this E shape. We're going to start on the 7th fret, and you can have the low E open if you want, and then I'm going to have 7th fret of the A string with my index finger. My ring finger is going to be on the D, the G, and the B of the 9th fret. Now, on that D shape, for this chromatic approach thing to work real nice, I want you to do it this way. We're going to have our index finger on the 5th fret of the high E. Pinky's going to be on the 7th fret of the B, and then your ring finger is going to be on the 7th fret of the G. Now here's the deal. When we're playing these, I'm not actually holding down those chord shapes, but in my mind's eye, when I'm visualizing the fretboard and I'm thinking about how I'm playing these notes and also what note I'm playing, I'm seeing these shapes. Okay, so this takes me to one of the first things I want to show you. So this, we've talked about this, I think in the thirds lesson and some of the country lessons, but this flat third to major third to root, okay? This, it's so important in guitar playing, especially anything that has a little bit of country, a little bit of that swampiness. It just comes up all the time. So let's just talk about it one more time. You've got this, I'm moving from the 5th fret of the G to the 6th fret of the G, and then index finger on the 5th fret of the high E. Now, as I do that, if you visualize this shape, you kind of see that chromatic approach right into that, right? Now, Nate, you're spending an awful lot of time on that. I am, because that little maneuver there, going from that flat third to that major third, is all over the place. And anything, again, blues, country, swamp, or anything like that. But also, you don't have to do it just there. You can do it here, right? And what's nice here is that this is on this D shape. I'm starting on the 6th fret of the B string to the 7th fret of the B, and then hitting that same A note on the high E, but now, because we're on a D chord, it's no longer the root, it's the 5th of the chord. But just those two things together, just sort of in the same space, starts to form a little melody, right? And again, all I'm visualizing is this shape and approaching it chromatically, okay? And this is where we start, and I'm going to give you some more here in just a second. So, with that same D shape, if we're in a blues, the 4 chord is going to be one of those things that you want to make sure you dress it nice. And you want to make sure you adorn it with the appropriate color tones. So with that, we're going to slide in from the flat third to the major third to that 5th. And then what if we went down here like to this root to the flat 7? So that's going to be from the 7th fret of the G down to the 5th fret of the G. So one more time on the B string, 6, slip to 7 on the B, hitting that high E on the 5th, and then skipping the B, coming down to the G string, and pulling off to from the 7th to the 5th. And if you wanted to play that B, you could go like this. Or you could go. Or either which way, but that's making kind of a D7 sound, right? Okay, so now what I want to do is take those two ideas, let's kind of set them on the shelf for just a second, and let's go over here to the pentatonic scale, and let's add some chromaticism into that. So when we're doing the blues in A, you can play the A minor pentatonic scale over the entirety of it, and it will sound great. In fact, it really comes down to your phrasing, right? However, you can also play F sharp minor pentatonic scale. Why? Well, because that's going to yield a major sound. If you're playing A minor blues, well, that's not going to work. But if you're playing like an A dominant 7 blues, A7, right, where you have a C sharp as the major third, F sharp minor pentatonic, if I say those notes one at a time and say them as they relate to A as a tonal center, F sharp is the 6th, A is the 1, B is the 2nd of the 9th, same thing, C sharp is the major third, and then E is the 5th, and then it repeats. So all those are pretty safe notes, right? Well, a hip thing to do, and we've talked about this before, but if this is your first time hearing this, you're going to love this. A hip thing to do is like, while you're playing, or if you're playing an A blues and you start out playing an F sharp minor pentatonic, and then when it goes to the D, if you play A minor pentatonic, that sounds pretty cool because that A minor pentatonic over a D chord, now I'm going to say the A minor notes, the A minor pentatonic notes as it relates to D. You with me? So A minor pentatonic as it relates to D, A is the 5th of D, right? C is the flat 7, D is the 1, E is the 2nd or the 9th, and G is the 4th, and then it repeats. All very hip. By the way, G is the 4th or the 11th, right? So there's some kind of cool jazzy tones in there. So that one's for free. If you play the F sharp minor pentatonic over the A and then the A minor pentatonic over the D, it's going to sound awesome. And then when the E comes around, you can either stay in the A minor or you can go back to F sharp minor. Both sound great, right? And blend the two, which is where I wanted to get to. As we're blending the two of these, you can go from one to the other back and forth, no problem. Sounds great. But check out this little chromatic idea. And here's what we're going to do. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, here's F sharp minor pentatonic. Starting on the 2nd fret of the low E, 5th fret of the low E, 2nd fret of the A, 4th fret of the A, 2nd fret of the D, 4th fret of the D, 2nd fret of the G, 4th fret of the G, 2nd fret of the B, 5th fret. Probably switch to my pinky there. You can keep your ring finger if you like. 5th fret of the B, 2nd fret of the high E, 5th fret of the high E with ring or pinky. Right? Now, check out this little chromatic idea right here and make sure I don't forget this thing. All right, so I'm going to start on the 4th fret of the G, and all I'm going to do, very much like we did a second ago, I'm just going to slide up. I love that little, I do it all the time. It's just kind of a neat little thing to do. It feels good, and also, it actually, to me, it feels really good in the hands. You're going to be on the 4th fret of the G. I'm going to slide up to the 5th fret of the G, and then my index is going to come back here to the 2nd fret of the B. You can do your ring finger if you want. It's a good time to get your pinky involved. A lot of folks spend too much time forgetting to invite pinky to the party. Pinky's a good friend. Pinky's that friend that always is faithful to bring a couple of bags of chips to every party. You know what I mean? You're throwing a little get-together, and you're not sure if anybody is going to show up. You know Pinky would love to come and would love to bring a bag of sriracha-flavored Doritos. Man, this thing is covered in coffee. I had somebody comment the other day that they were going to make a pilgrimage from New Jersey to come see the coffee stains on this table. And when I read that, I was like, well, I can't disappoint. So now I'm almost kind of recklessly pouring this coffee because I want the legend to live up to the hype. I'm just kidding. All right, anyway. Here we go. All right, so that little lick. That's a cool one. Guess what? You can do the same thing on the next string over. This time I'm going to be on the 4th fret of the D. Now this one's kind of interesting because this is going to be F sharp to G to A. A little less controversial, but nonetheless still very spicy because you've got the 6 to the dominant 7 to the root. And then this little guy here, you've already done this probably a million times, but here it comes again. Think about it. So 3, 4 on the A string to the 2nd fret of the D. Now what's interesting is because I'm doing this, what's happening is I'm actually sort of blending. If you think about this is F sharp minor pentatonic and this is A minor pentatonic, I'm kind of blending the top of that A minor pentatonic with the bottom of that F sharp minor pentatonic. And that you could hear sort of that C triad going to that B triad is already kind of making this nice little chromatic rub. And it sounds really cool, but here's another one that is even more rubby. This one is going to be, I'm basically just going to get on the D string and the G string. Let's start on the G string. And I'm going to go downward, descending, and I'm pulling off. I'm pulling off on the 4th, the 3rd, to the 2nd. That's a good back pickup exercise, isn't it? And then I'm going to go to the D string, do the same thing. Now this, I like my pinky doing it. I don't know why. But you can use your ring finger too. It also works the other way too. I like doing this little, if I pull off here, and then I hit the 4th fret of the D, and then hit that 2nd fret of the G. So I'm starting on the G string, pulling off 4, 3, 2, and then that's on the G string, and then 4th fret on the D to the 2nd fret of the G. So here's like those licks sort of strung together. Right? And all that is a lot of chromatic approach all just sort of jammed up together, and I'm thinking very simply F sharp minor pentatonic with these little chromatic things in between. And for me, that's kind of the secret sauce, is I want to be thinking as little as possible. And so therefore, a very simple concept. And that concept is, I'm really just thinking my F sharp minor pentatonic. That's really all I'm doing. And I'm not thinking about what notes. That's where my hands are at. And if you spend some time with a metronome playing, or even better, with another person live, either in front of people or just in front of one another, playing that kind of stuff, what's going to happen is you're going to find some things that you can test, that you can be sure of. You know, one of my favorite parts of the whole David and Goliath story is when King Saul says, here, put on my armor, because I kind of want people to see you wearing my armor out there. And David responds, he's like, I haven't tested it. And so he denies the opportunity to be seen in the armor of the king, because he's like, no, I've tested these things out in the wilderness against the lion and the bear. You didn't know you're going to get a Sunday school lesson, but welcome to Chords and Coffee. The thing is a lot of these ideas, in order for them to work like you, and even more importantly, my hope is that you find something where you start to sound like you, right? That's really where the most gratification, the most growth comes from, is when you start to pursue the sound of your own voice. Well, the only way to do that is you got to take some of this stuff I'm giving you, and you got to test it. You got to play. You got to play in front of people. You know, there's something I've been challenging myself is, how long can I play by myself and make music? I think it was Joe Pass that said a guitar player ought to be able to play by himself for an hour and make some music, right? Playing the blues is a great way to do that. Using these chromatic approaches is a great way to stretch that old familiar pentatonic scale into something kind of new and fresh sounding. So let's get some chords in our hands that'll actually help this sound even cooler. All right, here's a little blues thing, and what we're going to do is I'm going to try to keep this kind of simple, because I want you to have something, again, that you can show to somebody else and go, hey, do this, because I'm going to work on my chromatic stuff, right? So what we're going to do is, you can use your ring finger or your pinky. You know, I don't know which one's more comfortable. I kind of like my pinky doing it, but let's just go for ring. So we're going to be playing in A notes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this little D triad, and I'm thinking in my mind this is sort of like a D over A. And so this is going to be on the 7th fret, and with one finger here, and ring in this case, I'm holding down the D, the G, and the B, and then I'm resolving this to this little A7 grip, and this is going to be index finger on the 5th fret of the D, the G, and the B, and then my middle finger is going to be on the 6th fret of the G. And if you want to introduce this chromatic approach in this chord sequence, what you can do is when you go, you can hit that 5th fret with your index finger, and then apply that middle finger on that G string of the 6th fret a little after the fact. So you get this. And I just heard somebody in my head say, what are you doing with your right hand? So what I'm doing is I am picking with my pick, and I'm actually plucking with my middle finger, my ring finger, and I'm raking with my pick and plucking, sort of in this one fluid motion. So you have this, and Jordan, I don't know if they can see that there. That's that sound, and when I do that, and I like just adding that little there, because honestly, rhythmically, I kind of need it to keep me on track and in the pulse of the groove that I'm hearing in my head. Now when you go to the 4 chord, this one I would hit the index finger on the 10th fret of the low E, and definitely use the pinky here, because otherwise I feel a little scrunchy. But I'm going to have my pinky here on the D, the G, and the B, just like before, on the 12th fret this time though. And then after I hit that little rake and pluck, then I'm going to make just a good old-fashioned D7 chord. If you're playing acoustic, this might be a little much up here. If you're playing electric, you'll be fine. is you're gonna have your index finger on the 10th fret of the low E to the high E, and then I'm gonna build a little E7 underneath it with my ring finger on the 12th fret of the A. Boom. Human capo is holding down the D string, and then I'm gonna have my middle finger is gonna be on the 11th fret of the G. If you wanna go for broke, you can put your pinky on that B string, but I just do this. So. That's back to the A, and then on my turnaround, let's do an E7 sharp 9 to an E9. So what does that look like? That's going to be middle finger on the A string of the 7th fret, index finger on the 6th fret of the D, ring finger on the 7th fret of the G, pinky is going to be on the 8th fret of the B, and then I'm just going to slide my pinky down here. I'm going to slide my pinky down to the 7th fret of the B. You could lay your ring finger on the 7th fret of the G, the B, and the high E. Either way is great. And then down to the D9, and that's going to be 5th fret of the A string, 4th fret of the D, and then my ring finger on the G, the B, and the high E of the 5th fret. Now, I hear, just to kind of spice it up a little bit, from that D9, we're going to go up here to F sharp minor 7 flat 5. If you're saying, Nate, what in the world? Well, there's an episode floating around out there that you can watch that has these chords divided into tension and release chords. And if you hadn't watched that, I'm here to tell you that F sharp minor 7 flat 5, it's the same thing as a D7 or a D dominant 7 chord sound, just doesn't have D in the bass, right? Very hip sounding. This is going to be index finger on the A string of the 9th fret, ring finger on the 10th fret of the D, middle finger is going to be on the 9th fret of the G, and then pinky is going to be on the 10th fret of the B. And then we go back to... So while you're doing that, or while someone else is doing that, try these chromatic approaches, right? And this thing, you know, you can do this for the rest of your life and discover all kinds of cool stuff. There's tons of cool blues licks. In fact, one of the ones that was kind of one of the first little chromatic-y blues licks that I learned, I felt like, okay, this is really cool and I want to explore more options, is this guy right here. Again, on the 4 chord, because it's important to treat the 4 chord with the utmost respect. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our middle finger and I'm going to slide in to the 11th fret of the G and then hit that 10th fret with my index finger and then this little maneuver. And there's so many different ways you can do this, but you go from 11 to 10 on the B and then on the 12th fret, 12, 11, 10, straight down. And then on that 13, I like to go and bend up from the 13 to the 15th, back to the 13, but just hit the 13th fret of that B string. One of the things that I have found as a place of admiration to folks who play a lot of blues is they really get their bends dialed in and very purposeful and very lyrical and vocal sounding. And again, the only way to do that is to just practice it and to work it over and over and over again. And you might say, well, Nate, I hate to practice. Well, this is that blurry line where practice can kind of feel like play, right? But here's that whole thing one more time. So, after that little 13th bend, I'm coming back here to the 10th fret of the B. So, try that. Inject that into your playing. You know, there is a ton, this is a deep well that we can go down, and there's a ton of different ways to start looking at the chromatic approach. If you like this and you want to see more of this, please, in the comments section, hey, Nate, more chromatic blues stuff. I'm hungry for it and I'm ready for it. Brew me up that cup of coffee that we're brewing every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time here on YouTube. You know, we got a saying around here. We're living life the best we can with a guitar in our hand, sometimes drink a cup of coffee. Thank you for the privilege of your time. We'll see you next week for another Chords Coffee.